Oh gosh, Mike was a great guy. He was 6'2", about 230, and just loved life, very full of life. And we met at a JC conference. Had a lot in common because we both loved doing things for our community and serving other people. And we just met, fell in love, and got married about a year after that. After we got married in 1989, we were living in Virginia, and Mike was working for Virginia Farm Bureau Insurance Company, and I was working as the executive director of the Virginia PTA organization when I found out that we were expecting a baby. We had the baby, and 6 weeks later, Mike had a new job in Colorado. Everything was going great, new job, new life in Colorado, very exciting time in our life having that little new precious baby with us as well. Mike traveled a lot with his job, with training people, as I mentioned. He would go to 7 states in the region around Colorado, and he was asked to go to Chickasha, Oklahoma to do a training. Well, Mike's mom and granddad and grandma still lived in Boyd, Texas, which is in Wise County, just north of Fort Worth. And he was talking to his mom a couple of days before he was to go do that assignment in Oklahoma, and she said, well, your granddad is not doing very well, he's very ill. And could you perhaps fly to DFW, get in my car, then drive to Oklahoma, and that way you could spend some time with us when you finished your training. So he agreed to do that. Obviously, he wanted to see his granddad because of the nature of his illness. So I had lunch with my husband at the Denver airport when you could still do that back in 1991. Said, goodbye, I love you, I'll talk to you tonight. And I did talk to him that night. He got to DFW and got his mom's car and went to Boyd and visited with them. And then he left to drive to Chickasha, Oklahoma. And that's where he did his training on that Tuesday and Wednesday, and was to finish on Thursday, November 21st of 1991. I had talked to him each of those nights, but on that Thursday I didn't hear from him. And I really began to wonder, gosh, why didn't he call? He always called me. So I had tucked the baby into her bed, and I got in bed about 10:30 as I recall. And I picked up a book that was laying beside my bed and I began to read. And it's very ironic that I was reading this particular book that night. This book is called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. So I was reading that book when the doorbell did ring. I peeked out the upstairs window. We were living in a 3-story townhouse, and it was snowing quite heavily that night in Denver. I peeked out that window and I recognized that there was a green minivan on our driveway, and I knew exactly who that belonged to. And all I could think of is, what in the world are Cheryl and Greg doing at my house at almost 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday night? So I walked down the 2 flights of stairs to the bottom floor where the front door was. And I describe it as never forgetting every single step I took. I'll never forget what I had on, and I'll certainly never forget opening my front door, and there stood Cheryl and Greg, and our pastor was right behind them. And everyone knows when a minister, a rabbi, or a police officer is at your door late at night, it's not going to be good news. And I guess I instantly recognized that. And I wanted to do the only thing that seemed natural to me at the time, which was to slam the door in their face. But I couldn't do that, of course. I had to let them in. And that begins what I describe as the longest night of my life. Well, when I opened that door and saw them standing there, I'm sure I had a blank stare on my face. And my friend Cheryl, with no training in death notification, being a young mom just like me, had to look at me and say, Laura, there's been a terrible accident and Mike has been killed. So they helped me understand that I had to call a lot of people, including Mike's boss, because he was on a business trip, Mike's other friends and family members that might not have known from his mother, because she was the one who had been notified first, because Mike was driving her vehicle. And of course, the Wise County Sheriff's Office contacted her first. And they had to help me understand that I had to go into our closet, pick out clothes to bury my 32-year young husband. I had to figure out how in the world I was going to get to Dallas-Fort Worth the next morning. We were a young married couple with very little money. I wasn't working except a few hours part-time, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. I fortunately had my friend Greg, Cheryl's husband, who said to me, I'm going with you on that airplane. He realized quickly, I think, that I couldn't handle a baby all the paraphernalia that comes with her and getting myself there too. So he did graciously offer to go with me. We were able to get to the airport in Denver. Someone paid for my ticket. I still to this day do not know who, but I believe it was Mike's company because his boss was there. And Greg and I, my friend and I, and my baby got on that airplane to Dallas. And on that airplane was where I really discovered what I had become the night before. And what I had become was a single mom in an instant and a widow in an instant. Well, I was very curious what in the world had happened to Mike. How could that happen? I knew he had left Chickasha, I knew he was en route to Boyd, and I knew the way he should have gone. What we found out a few days later from the police report and from witnesses that were able to give statements was that Mike left Chickasha in the afternoon, but instead of driving straight to Boyd, he drove into downtown Fort Worth and he went to eat at his favorite Mexican restaurant, which is Joe T. Garcia's. So he went to Joe T. Garcia's. He left there around 7 p.m. He had 0 alcohol in his system. And he was driving his mom's 4-door large Crown Victoria headed northbound on Highway 287 just out of Fort Worth. That is a 4-lane divided highway with a large grassy median between the northbound and southbound lanes. It was already dark at 7 o'clock that time of year, and evidently he was going 58 in a posted 55-mile-an-hour speed zone. He was driving on the inside lane, probably listening to the radio. He topped the overpass at Blue Mountain Road, and at the same time he topped that overpass, a drunk driver driving a 4-door Cadillac, another very large vehicle, heavy vehicle, topped it, headed south in Mike's northbound lane, and he was going 83 miles an hour. So the combined speed of 135 miles an hour head-on is not survivable generally. Even though Mike had on his seatbelt, which I remind everyone is the best defense against a drunk driver, in this case it could not save his life. The drunk driver was so drunk that he didn't have his seatbelt on, and he died as well at the scene. What we later found out is how drunk that drunk driver was. He was driving at a 0.34 blood alcohol concentration, which at that time was 3 times the legal limit. It would now be 4 times the legal limit.
My childhood before the accident was pretty normal, great childhood. It was just a regular family, going to school, coming home, greeting the parents home, coming from when they were getting from work, and you know, going out with friends. We were always a low-income family. That was always a struggle for us. But my parents always made sure we had everything we needed. He was very proud of me, of us. To him, the biggest, most happiest part of his life was his family. He was so dedicated to us. He was a very hard worker. He was always working on something. Whether he was not working at his job, at home, he was always doing something, working on the car, anything in the house that needed to be fixed, he was always doing something. He was not a person who just laid around and did nothing. And he was very happy, very friendly. He could make friends anywhere in an instant. Complete strangers, and just meeting a complete stranger and they're already friends. He was a great guy. And with this great personality, my sister Melissa was the youngest. And she was just a great person. She was always happy, always smiling. I think out of the 3 of us, she was the less troublemaker. I was usually the one who always caused the most trouble. And she was just kind of the baby of the house, and we always just really pampered her, really, you know, took care of her. And we're always very aware of her being the baby of the house, just being the youngest, always. But she was just always so happy. I remember before the accident, We were going to a family event, and we were going out of town, and that was just normal for us. We would always go out of town to visit relatives. Before we came back, I actually asked my father. I said, may I sleep over with one of my cousins, because we wanted to go to the carnival here in town the next day. And then he said, well, no, we'll see what happens tomorrow. And maybe tomorrow I can take y'all early to the carnival or something. So usually I would argue with him about it, but I just accepted it. I was like, okay, we'll see what happens tomorrow then. And those were his last words to me. So I just got in the truck, fell asleep, and I was like, well, I'll be home. I'll wake up at home. I woke up and I was excited, thinking I'm waking up at home, ready to go to the carnival. I'm pretty sure my dad's gonna let me go, and he's gonna take us and we're gonna have fun. And I opened my eyes, and as I opened my eyes, it was my vision wasn't very clear. It was blurred, and then as it cleared up, I realized I was in a small room on this small bed, hospital bed, and I had things all around me, machines, wires, and I was scared. I had a band going around my left arm, and I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. And finally, when our nurse came in, I tried to speak to her, but I couldn't speak because I had a tube that was going in my mouth. So when I tried to talk, I couldn't. So the way we communicated was that she brought an alphabet, and I had to point at the letters to ask her about where I was, what was going on, where my family was, where was my mom, my brother, my dad, my sister. Where were they? What happened to them? Are they okay? I was just told that we were in the car accident and that we were all there, and that we were hit by a drunk driver. When I asked the doctor about my condition, he told me that I wasn't going to be able to walk anymore. And that was the first thing and the first part of the worst news that I found out. He told me that I had a spinal cord injury and that lost the connection from my brain to my legs, so I wouldn't be able to walk again. And at that moment I was like, well, there's nothing worse than this. It cannot get worse than this. And I think a few days later, whenever I had some family members who came to visit me, I asked them directly about my family, about my mom, my dad, my brother, and my sister. They told me, Melissa passed away, as well as your father. And I was shocked, because I thought anything but that. I came back home and I was excited about getting out of the hospital. I was tired, but I was scared too, because it was me finally being out on my own and having to become independent, because I never thought that I would be able to do things on my own. I thought I was always going to be dependent on someone to do everything for me. I knew my dad wasn't going to be there and my sister wasn't going to be there. And sometimes that's one of the most difficult parts of the getting back home. Just kind of getting back into that regular routine, because it was never going to be the same routine as it was before. You know, overall, I think just surviving is the most difficult part, because the victims that are left surviving are the ones that have to deal with the everyday difficulties and stress, the stares, what other people say about it. It's just a difficult change, and just losing the loved ones. I think losing my dad and losing my sister was very difficult for me, and it still is. I still sometimes have a hard time understanding that they're just gone. And at some points I'm like, well, I want them to be here for these moments in my life.
Many positive things have come from Mike's death. Many, many positive things. One of the first things I think of is just awareness of my friends and family first, those first few years. Because I got involved with MAD 2 years after the crash, I let everyone know that drunk driving was not acceptable, that this is what had caused the death of my first husband, and I wanted everyone to make better choices. I then expanded that circle and was fortunate to be the state chairperson of MAD in Texas and serve to do things in the state legislature and do public policy work and to do prevention work across the state so that more people would hear. And then it took another step when I was elected to the National Board of Directors of MAD and got to spend some time with people all over the country working on these same types of efforts federally for policy issues and just in many other aspects with prevention messages. And then the pinnacle that really to me was Mike's pat on my shoulder was when I was elected the national president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving in 2008. And I was privileged to do that for 3 years and go literally across the country and then some parts of the world to spread the message.
I've learned, and I can help others. I learned from this bad experience to help others to change their lives and hopefully not have this happen to another family. Save them from going through this. Save another family. I think that's the greatest thing that has come out of it, because I can tell someone how horrible my experience is and they will learn from it, and they'll see, well, I don't want that for me. I don't want that for myself, so I'm gonna change and I'm not gonna drink and drive.
Don't do it. It's as simple as that. There are too many options available for all of us, whether it's using a sober friend to drive you. And that's not the least drunk, that's a person who's had nothing to drink, a sober friend.
A lot of people say, well, you know, I can get home, I'm fine, I didn't drink too much, or I've done it before, but not, sometimes people would get away with it once, sometimes they won't. Sometimes in that first time that they do it, they'll have a crash. Sometimes they won't. But just because you might be able to get away with it once, doesn't mean you can't get away with it again. And if it's your first time that you're doing it, think about it.
I remind people that for the price of their DWI, which can cost you up to $17,000 after hiring an attorney, paying fees and fines, you could have taken a helicopter home that night. Wouldn't that have been a whole lot more fun? I think it would have been. So I just want people to understand there's so many options. You don't have to drive drunk, ever. And you don't have to drive impaired or any other drug. Alcohol is a drug, but there's many other drugs that people choose to use as well. It's not worth killing a Mike Dean or causing serious injury to yourself or anyone else or being responsible for a young baby not having her daddy because of your selfishness to decide to drink and drive.
If they're not going to think about the other people out there that they can hurt, they need to think about themselves as well.
The message is very simple. Just don't do it.